Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Austin Moore, and I'm with Remax United and the Austin Moore Group. And today, I am being accompanied by my wife, and she's going to ask me some rapid fire questions because some of the questions that she may have, you guys may also have. So I'm going to do my best to answer those over the next few minutes here.
What is the difference between pre-qualification and pre-approval?
So the biggest difference between those two would be a pre-qualification. When a lender digs in and gets a pre-qual for a buyer, they're mainly looking at a summary of the buyer's income. Maybe they got some employment history. Maybe they got some idea of their debt to income ratio, but it's not a thorough dive into the buyer's financials. Whereas a pre-approval, on the other hand, they're pulling credit. They're pulling W-2s for work. It's much more thorough and a much better chance that the buyer is pre-approved and ready to go for the purchase at that point.
Do I have to pay the realtor as a buyer?
So after some recent changes, this is a tougher question to answer. On the buying side, what I always tell my clients is I'm going to do my very best to get the seller to pay my commission so that you as the buyer are not going to be responsible. So I'm going to negotiate on your behalf to try and get my commission and my compensation taken care of by the seller. Since the recent lawsuit, things have changed a little bit. The seller does not have to compensate a buyer's agent, but at the same time, I can tell you that since the lawsuit, there really hasn't been any issues or too many changes in my area when it comes to the seller compensating me. I'm always going to ask for the seller to do that. And I have not run into a situation yet where the buyer has had to pay my commission.
What is earnest money?
So really, earnest money is just a good faith deposit. Like, hey, we as the buyers really want to move forward on your home. We love your home. And this deposit is a sign of that, kind of a good faith, like, hey, we want to move forward. We want to purchase your home. And it can also be utilized if there's ever any issues with the inspection and maybe the sellers aren't willing to make certain repairs and the buyer is not comfortable with inheriting those repairs. Well, at that point, they could use the inspection period to back out and get their earnest money back at that point.
In what type of situations do buyers not receive their earnest money back?
So really, it just depends. Sometimes attorneys get involved if there's a dispute over earnest money. Both parties have to agree in order for the earnest money to be released to either party, whether that be the seller or the buyer. I would say an example of a situation where a buyer may not get their earnest money back is if they back out outside of their contingency periods. So you typically have a contingency period for financing. You have a contingency period for inspections. You have a contingency period for the appraisal. If they back out outside of those timeframes for no reason at all, well, then the seller could be compensated with the earnest money at that point.
Should I waive the inspection?
No, do not waive the inspection. I would say that the only time that you should consider that is if you are in a situation where you're competing against 5 to 10 different offers and you really, really want the home. But even so, I mean, you better be sure at that point because there's just so many things that can be hidden that you can't see on the surface that you're going to want a professional to dig into. I'm always going to recommend that somebody have a home inspection done, because I purchased a home once and the sewer line was bad. And I didn't check the sewer line prior to purchasing. That was a big mistake on my part. So definitely always going to recommend that you have an inspection done.
How long does it take to close on a home?
So a pretty standard time frame, I would say, is 30 to 45 days. There are situations where it's much longer. Could be 60, could be 90 days. But on average, you're looking in that 30 to 45 day range to complete all your contingencies, like your earnest money getting turned in, your inspection period, your resolution period, your appraisal period, your final walkthrough, and then closing. But sometimes it comes down to the sellers and the buyer schedules. Maybe the sellers are in the process of trying to find a home still, and they need some more time for that closing date. And maybe the buyer doesn't want to close until a certain date because they're not going to be in the area until that time frame. So it really depends on the scenario, but most of the time, 30 to 45 days.